Behind the grand gates of Abuja's wealthiest mansion, Femi and Chioma Kalu live a life that most can only dream of. But the truth beneath their polished facade is far from the picture-perfect image they project. In a marriage bound by business rather than love, their union is a contract as cold and brittle as the walls around them. When the pressure to produce an heir turns their fractured relationship into a battlefield, Femi, driven by loneliness, finds solace in Zainab, the young maid who enters their household without understanding the cost. Years later, cast out and left to fend for herself, Zainab raises triplets, boys who are the image of the father they've never known. A chance encounter brings Femi face to face with the family he abandoned, stirring long-buried emotions and a desire to make things right. But as he tries to earn their trust, Chioma's simmering resentment brews into something far more dangerous. With secrets unraveling and revenge on the horizon, Femi must confront the consequences of his choices, or risk losing the only family he may ever truly have. In ties of silence, loyalties will be tested, love will be put to the ultimate challenge, and redemption will come at a price. Can Femi reclaim the family he turned his back on, or will his past sins destroy his last chance at happiness? Femi adjusted his cuffs, glancing at his wife beside him as they entered Abuja's grandest gala. Chioma's smile was practiced and unwavering, every bit the flawless hostess. But Femi sensed her impatience, the way her eyes flitted to her watch every few minutes. As they moved through the crowd, whispers followed. "You're late again," Chioma muttered, leaning closer under the guise of smiling for a camera. Femi's smile tightened. "Important meetings. You know how it is." "I know how it always is." Chioma looked away, her gaze cold. "Appearances, Femi. That's what matters tonight." They continued through the sea of faces, smiling and nodding, their hands barely touching. The evening went on like this, a careful dance of feigned unity, but beneath it all, a storm brewed between them. Hours later, Femi opened the door to their mansion, its grandeur dimmed by the silence that met him. Chioma entered without a word, heading straight to her room. "Chioma," Femi called after her. She paused but didn't turn around. "Yes?" Her tone was dismissive, as if she already knew what he'd say. "Can we talk? About us?" She laughed dryly, finally facing him. "Talk? About what, exactly?" "There's nothing between us, Femi. We're here for appearances, nothing more." "Appearances won't give us a future," he replied. "Or an heir." Chioma's gaze sharpened, and she shook her head. "An heir. Always your family's favorite topic." She stepped into her room, closing the door with a finality that echoed down the hall. Femi stood in the empty corridor, the mansion's grandeur feeling hollow. The next morning, Zainab, a young maid in her early 20s, arrived at the mansion. She looked around in awe, taking in the towering ceilings and polished marble floors. Chioma glanced at her briefly before waving her hand dismissively. "You're here to keep things running smoothly," Chioma said, barely looking up. "My husband and I, we don't communicate much directly. You'll handle messages between us?" Zainab nodded, trying to hide her nervousness. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the opportunity." Chioma gave her a scrutinizing look. "Just do your job well and stay invisible. We value discretion here." She turned away, her attention already elsewhere. Zainab felt a strange tension in the house, like an unspoken rule that settled over her as she began her duties. She sensed the distance between Mr. and Mrs. Kalu, but she kept her head down, focusing on her work. That evening, Femi waited for Chioma in the dining room, watching as she entered, perfectly poised but distant. "Chioma, we need to talk about having a child," he said, attempting to keep his tone steady. She raised an eyebrow, her eyes cold. "A child now? And why would I want that?" "For the family, for our future," Femi replied, trying to keep his frustration at bay. "My parents keep asking." "And that's their problem," Chioma interrupted, folding her arms. "I have no interest in motherhood, Femi. My life, my choices." "You're thinking only of yourself," he said, voice hardening. "This family deserves more." "Then perhaps find someone else to fulfill that need," she snapped, turning and leaving the room without a backward glance. Femi sat alone, his thoughts churning as he realized how far they drifted. Later that night, as Zainab dusted in Femi's office, she jumped at the sound of footsteps. She looked up to find Femi watching her from the doorway, his gaze lingering a moment longer than it should have. "You've done a good job with the place," he said, his voice unexpectedly soft. "Thank you, sir," she replied, her eyes lowering to the floor. For a brief moment, he watched her intently, his gaze thoughtful. "You're new here?" "Yes, sir. I started today," she said, feeling suddenly aware of his presence. He nodded, turning to leave. "Keep up the good work, Zainab." His voice held a weight she couldn't quite place, and as he walked away, she felt an unease settle over her, as if a door had just opened to something she couldn't yet see. As Zainab dusted the grand staircase, she couldn't shake the feeling of isolation that settled over her. The mansion, despite its opulence, was empty of warmth. She'd seen Chioma sweep past her earlier, barely offering a glance, while Femi had been polite but distant. Suddenly, Femi's voice startled her. "Zainab, right?" "Yes, sir." She nodded, keeping her eyes down. "You work hard," he said, his tone softer than before. "Not everyone here notices effort." "Thank you, sir," she replied, her voice quiet. She sensed his lingering gaze, making her uneasy. Femi hesitated, almost as if wanting to say more, but simply nodded. "Keep up the good work, Zainab." His words left her feeling both acknowledged and wary, sensing there was more beneath his polished exterior. Later that day, Femi sat in his office, an ornate room that bore all the weight of his family's legacy. His phone buzzed. It was his mother. "Femi," she began, her voice firm. "We've been patient, but you need to take your role seriously. An heir is a necessity." "Mother, it's complicated," he replied, frustration lacing his words. "Complicated?" she echoed. "What could be so complicated about starting a family?" He rubbed his temples, exhaustion seeping into his bones. "It's not something I can force, Mother. Chioma doesn't want children." "Then perhaps it's time you consider other options," she said pointedly. He ended the call, feeling the pressure coil around him. The weight of family expectations bore down, widening the chasm between him and Chioma. In the quiet of her small room in the servants' quarters, Zainab pulled a worn photo of her mother from her pocket. The medical bills were mounting, and despite her meager salary, this job was all that kept her family afloat. "Everything all right, Zainab?" one of the other maids asked, noticing her somber look. "Yes, I just have responsibilities outside of here," she answered, slipping the photo away. The burden she carried felt heavier each day, yet she knew she had no choice but to endure. As she lay on her cot that night, her mind wandered to the imposing figure of Femi, his gaze lingering in a way that unsettled her. She couldn't risk losing this job, not with her family depending on her. She had to stay, no matter what it cost her. One evening, as Zainab cleared the dining table, Femi entered the room, his face unreadable. "Zainab," he said quietly, moving closer. She tensed, but kept her gaze lowered. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice steady despite her discomfort. "You're here alone most nights. Don't you get lonely?" he asked, his tone soft but intense. She swallowed, forcing herself to stay calm. "I'm just here to work, sir." Femi reached out, brushing a stray hair from her face. "You're a beautiful woman, Zainab. You don't need to hide in the shadows." The words chilled her, and she took a step back. "Please, sir, I need to finish my duties." The air thickened with tension, and Femi hesitated before nodding and stepping away. But his lingering gaze haunted her, a silent threat she couldn't escape. The following day, Zainab moved through her tasks with a new tension. She tried to avoid Femi's path, but as she dusted the study, he appeared in the doorway. "You avoided me today, Zainab," he remarked, his tone casual but his eyes serious. I had many duties," she replied, forcing calm into her voice. Femi's expression darkened. "We understand each other, don't we? It's best you keep our conversations private. You wouldn't want to risk this job, I'm sure." The veiled threat hit her like a punch, and she nodded, her face pale. As he left, she felt a chill, realizing she was bound to silence, trapped in a secret that weighed heavily on her. The mansion had closed around her, and there was no one to turn to. Zainab's hands trembled as she held the doctor's note, confirming her deepest fear. She was pregnant. The weight of the news pressed on her, and she barely made it back to her small room before collapsing onto her cot, staring at the paper in her hand. "What am I going to do?" she whispered to herself, clutching her stomach. The reality of her situation settled heavily around her. She knew she had no one to turn to and feared losing her job. Days passed as she attempted to hide her condition, wearing looser clothes and keeping her head down. But each day brought more dread, the fear of discovery gnawing at her. She resolved to keep the secret as long as she could. Chioma noticed the change in Zainab. One afternoon, during a lunch with friends, one of them leaned over, eyes twinkling. "Your maid, Zainab, seems to be putting on weight. Is there something going on?" Chioma raised an eyebrow, brushing it off with a laugh, but later, she watched Zainab closely, scrutinizing the girl's every movement. As she observed her carefully navigating the household, a suspicion took root, one that refused to be ignored. Afterward, she cornered Zainab, her voice cold. "You seem different lately. Care to explain?" Zainab's heart raced, but she managed a small smile. "No, ma'am. Just working as always." Chioma's gaze lingered. "Is that so? Keep it that way." But her eyes said more. Zainab could feel the intensity, and it was only a matter of time before her secret was forced out. The following week, Chioma entered Zainab's room unannounced, catching her off guard. "Explain yourself," she demanded, her voice harsh. "Ma'am." Zainab's eyes widened, her heart hammering as she instinctively clutched her stomach. Chioma's eyes flashed with realization. "You're pregnant," she hissed. "Don't even try to deny it." Zainab's silence was confirmation enough, and Chioma's face twisted with anger. "How could you? Do you realize the disgrace this will bring?" "Ma'am, please." "I had no choice," Zainab whispered, voice trembling. Chioma narrowed her eyes. "There's always a choice. And you chose poorly." She stepped back, disgust visible in her every movement. "Pack your things. I want you gone by the morning." Desperate, Zainab begged, "Please, ma'am. I have nowhere else to go." But Chioma was unmoved, storming out and slamming the door behind her. The next morning, Zainab stood on the mansion's steps, her few belongings in hand, her heart heavy with despair. She had no destination, no plan, and no money. As she wandered through the bustling streets, the weight of her situation pressed down on her. Survival would be a daily battle now. Her mother's illness weighed heavily on her mind, and she knew she needed to find work quickly to keep sending money for her treatment. But who would hire her now, visibly pregnant and with no home? As she drifted through the crowded market, Zainab began to realize the harsh reality she now faced. She would have to rely on her strength and resilience, if not for herself, then for the child she carried. There was no turning back. After days of wandering, Zainab found a tiny room in a cramped part of town. The walls were thin, the noise constant, but it was a roof. She sat on the narrow bed, exhausted but resolute. She would keep her child, and she would find a way to make a life for both of them. The city's unforgiving streets became her new reality, and each day she fought to survive, pushing through hunger and exhaustion. She spent her days working small jobs, her thoughts constantly on her unborn child, finding solace in the quiet hope that they would one day have a life far removed from this hardship. Zainab knew she had made a choice, to survive, to protect her child, and to move forward without looking back. The days of the mansion were behind her, but her journey was just beginning. Years have passed. Zainab navigates the bustling Abuja market with ease, her 3 sons, Emeka, Ifena, and Namdi, trailing behind, helping where they can. Zainab has grown tougher, her gaze steady and watchful, but her sons are her pride. "Mom, look, we sold all the oranges." Emeka beams, holding up an empty basket. "Well done, my loves." She smiles, ruffling his hair. "You've worked hard." As they laugh together, a passerby stops, staring at the boy's resemblance to a man she had once known. But Zainab has learned to ignore looks and whispers. Her life is a far cry from what it once was, but it's hers, and she's made it on her own terms. One afternoon, Femi sits in traffic, tired and restless, when his gaze lands on a familiar face in the crowd. Zainab is there, holding baskets, with 3 boys who bear a striking resemblance to him. The shock roots him to the spot. "Stop the car," he orders, his driver pulling to the side. He steps out, calling, "Zainab?" Zainab freezes, her heart pounding. Her sons look up at her, confused. "Mom, who's that man?" "An old acquaintance," she replies, her voice tense. She pulls her children closer, her eyes narrowing at Femi. "What do you want, Femi?" He's at a loss, his mind reeling. They're mine, aren't they?" he whispers, realizing the truth. Her silence is answer enough. Determined to speak, Femi finds Zainab later that day, his voice trembling. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Tell you?" Zainab's eyes flash with anger. "After how you discarded me. After everything you did." "Zainab, I didn't know," he starts, guilt and regret filling his voice. "Exactly, Femi. You didn't know because you never cared enough to ask. And I had to survive without you, raising our children alone." Femi looks at his sons, his heart heavy. "Please, let me be a part of their lives now. I want to make it right." But Zainab shakes her head, the pain of years evident in her voice. "You can't erase the past, Femi, and I won't let you hurt them like you hurt me." Days later, Femi's resolve grows. He can't stop thinking about the children he abandoned unknowingly. After a long internal battle, he returns to Zainab's market stall. "Zainab, please," he pleads, humility in his voice. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, but a chance to know my sons. To support you, however you'll allow." She watches him, wary yet softened by his sincerity. "And what happens when you tire of them, Femi? When your pride takes over?" He swallows, nodding. "Then you have my word, Zainab. If I fail them, you'll never see me again." She studies his face, the struggle evident in his eyes. "I'll think about it," she finally says, her voice guarded. "But don't make promises you can't keep." After considering Femi's plea, Zainab sets conditions. They meet at a small cafe, where her sons stay close, unsure of the man before them. "If you're serious, Femi, you'll have to earn their trust." "My trust," she says, her tone firm. "They don't know you. Don't expect them to." Femi nods, humbled. "I understand, and I'll do whatever it takes." As the boys watch cautiously, Zainab's voice softens. "For their sake, I'll give you a chance. But remember, Femi, if you hurt them, you'll lose us forever." A tentative smile crosses Femi's face, and he extends his hand to his sons, who, after a glance at their mother, cautiously accept. For the first time, they are family, united by fragile trust and the hope for a future Femi never expected. Femi's visits become regular. Each week, he meets Zainab and the boys in a small park on the outskirts of Abuja, bringing books, food, and small toys. He watches his sons play, marveling at their laughter, each day feeling more at peace. One afternoon, Emeka tugs at his sleeve. "Will you come again tomorrow, Papa?" Femi smiles, a warmth spreading in his chest. "Of course, Emeka. I wouldn't miss it for anything." Zainab, watching from a distance, softens, seeing Femi's genuine efforts. Though she remains guarded, his consistency stirs something within her, a quiet hope that maybe he has truly changed. At home, Chioma notices Femi's frequent absences. One evening, she follows him and watches from a distance as he greets Zainab and the boys in the park. Her face twists with anger. She confronts him that night. "So, that's where you disappear to, spending time with that woman and her children?" Her voice drips with disdain. "They're my children, Chioma," Femi replies firmly. "I won't abandon them." Chioma's expression hardens, her pride wounded. "You've made a fool of me. Do you think I'll let you walk away so easily?" Femi's jaw tightens. "It's not about you, Chioma. This is about my sons." The following day, Chioma corners Femi in his office. "End it now, Femi, or I'll make sure you regret it," she says, her voice cold and determined. He meets her gaze, unfazed. "You don't scare me, Chioma, don't I?" She smiles bitterly. I'll make sure the world knows about your precious affair, and I'll destroy everything you've worked for. Femi takes a steadying breath. Then go ahead. I'm done living in fear of your threats. He leaves, determined to choose his family over the facade they've kept for so long. Femi returns to Zainab's home, his resolve firm. He tells her about Chioma's threats. She won't make this easy, he warns. Zainab looks away, the weight of their situation bearing down on her. I don't want any more conflict, Femi. I've fought enough battles. I know, he replies, his voice gentle, but I want you and the boys safe. This is my responsibility now. Her eyes meet his, softened. Then we stand together. If you're truly ready for this, he nods, squeezing her hand. More than anything. Finally, Femi approaches Chioma with a decision. I'm filing for divorce, he states, his tone unwavering. Chioma stares at him, her face a mask of fury. You'll regret this, Femi. You'll lose everything. But Femi remains resolute. I've already lost too much by staying with you. Now, I'm choosing my children. As he walks away, Femi feels a sense of freedom he hasn't felt in years, ready to face whatever battles lie ahead. He knows the journey won't be easy, but for the first time, he feels at peace with the life he's chosen. Femi opens the door to the mansion, this time with Zainab and the boys beside him. He's filled with a sense of pride and purpose. The once cold, imposing mansion feels different now, as if it's waiting to be transformed into a real home. Emeka, wide-eyed, looks up at Femi. This is where you live, Papa? Femi kneels down, meeting his son's gaze. This is where we all live now, Emeka. Together. Zainab hesitates on the threshold, her past struggles in this house flashing through her mind. But Femi's hand on her shoulder brings her back to the present. We'll make it right, he whispers. Meanwhile, Chioma seethes in her lawyer's office, refusing to lose everything to Femi. I want everything he has, especially that mansion, she demands, her voice icy. The lawyer hesitates. But legally, he's entitled to his share, and you signed a prenuptial agreement, then find a loophole. Chioma snaps. I will not let him play house with her. I'll use those boys if I have to. Her words are sharp, calculated, and her intent clear. Chioma is willing to bring the fight to Femi in court, a final act of control over what she believes she deserves. In the courtroom, Femi stands beside Zainab, her quiet strength anchoring him as Chioma's lawyer launches accusations, painting Femi as reckless and unfaithful. But Femi remains resolute, his love for his children clear in every answer. When Chioma takes the stand, her rage flares. He's abandoned everything our family's built, she accuses. I won't let him leave with nothing. Zainab watches, holding Femi's hand, knowing this is the final battle. When her turn comes, she speaks simply. I've raised our children alone, without his help or hers. All we ask is a chance to live with peace. The judge, observing both sides, sees through Chioma's anger and bitterness, and his ruling leans in Femi's favor, securing his custody and the right to his assets. After the trial, Chioma storms out, defeated but defiant. Femi watches her leave, feeling a mixture of sadness and relief. Zainab stands beside him. It's over, she says softly, almost in disbelief. Femi nods, the weight of the years lifting. It's finally over. He takes her hand, guiding her back to where the boys wait, grinning with their innocent understanding of victory. We have our family now, he says, looking into Zainab's eyes. Let's make this place ours. They walk together, leaving the courthouse behind, ready to create a life filled with warmth, free from the shadows that had once haunted them. Back at the mansion, Femi and Zainab set up the boys' rooms, filling them with toys, books, and laughter. The grand, cold rooms echo with life for the first time in years. As they sit together in the living room, Namdi curls up beside Femi. Are we staying here forever, Papa? Femi smiles, wrapping an arm around his son. Yes, Namdi. We're all staying together forever. Zainab watches them, her heart full. She knows their journey hasn't been easy, but for the first time, she feels a sense of true belonging. The mansion, once a symbol of power and control, is now a home where love and forgiveness reign. As the evening settles in, The family sits down to dinner, the sounds of laughter filling every corner, a testament to their resilience and the promise of a hopeful future.